آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Hopefully the sisters can see upstairs according to what I have in front of me. The projector is connected. If not, if you could please send maybe one of the young girls downstairs to let us know that it's not. Hopefully it is, inshallah. In previous lessons, we've discussed Surah Al-Kahf, and we've discussed Surah Al-Maryam, and all of that was with the intention, again, of showing that until we get to the point where we can understand Arabic, read Arabic and understand it, inshallah, we're moving towards that point, that nevertheless, the meanings of the Quran have, albeit they not complete, have been to an extent preserved in the English. And so until we get to the point where we can understand the Arabic, that we don't leave off reflection on the Quran, of the Quran. Because again, that was the purpose for which the Quran was sent down. And it is how we gain the greater lessons from the Quran. Allah mentions, Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka mubarakun liyadabbaru ayatihi wa liyatadhakkara ulul albab. It is a blessed book that we have sent down to you so that its ayat may be pondered upon, and so that people of intellect will take heed. And so the idea here is that the book was sent down to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in part so that we can reflect upon it, so that we can benefit from the lessons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed inside of it, so that we can act upon what He has taught us, so that we can be reminded that the difficult situations that we experience at times are not anomalies. They're not things that have happened only to us. They're not things that happen in isolation. That people before us were tested in the same way, and how they dealt with those tests, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded them for their patience in this life and the next. And so continuing on in that tradition, we're looking at the story of Musa alayhi salam. And as we come together in one of the houses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established to be worshipped in, then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sincerity in what we do. We ask Him that this gathering be for His sake, not to show off, not to make other people try to have some good impression of us, whether it's the person teaching or those who are in attendance. Perhaps the teacher is trying to show off what he knows, or perhaps the one who attends is trying to show people that he's diligent or studious, and that we try to remove those poor intentions from our heart as much as possible, and to try to remind ourselves that we're here for the sake of Allah, and that we want to draw closer to Allah, and that these few attempts that we make are indeed attempts to show our gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sending the Quran, for sending the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to convey that message, for sending the Sahaba who at times ate leaves, who went naked, who fought, who were kicked out of their homes, who lived with very meager sustenance so that this deen could be conveyed to us. So we are living and experiencing the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the hard work and diligence of people who came before us. And that should be encouragement for us to try to do what we can to continue in that legacy and to promote Islam and to support Islam as much as possible. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sincerity in what we do, to forgive us our shortcomings, and to reward us for any good that He has blessed us to achieve. Again, we started with Surah Al-Kahf. We followed that with Surah Al-Maryam, And so after Surah Al-Maryam comes Surah Al-Taha. Taha captures a huge part of the story of Musa alayhi salam. However, a lot of the Quran does. you're hard pressed to find, especially in the surahs that come prior to Surah Qaf or Surah Al-Hujurat, you're hard pressed to find a surah that doesn't mention Musa, Banu Israel to some degree. And so in choosing this topic for this lesson, Sheikh Tahir, may Allah preserve him, he put it out there that maybe I would be interested in doing a study of the story of Musa alayhi salam. And so I initially didn't want to take it because it's a huge task. But I'm glad that I did. I've learned a tremendous amount. You'll find that probably this study will be a little bit different than the previous lessons that we've done, just because we're going to be moving all over the place and trying to make connections. But the story of Musa alayhi salam is rich in lessons. And there's a reason why Allah repeats that story over and over again. And what makes his story, or the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents his story so interesting, is just how he tells the same story, but he recasts it in different ways and brings different details. And you really have to end up putting those smaller pieces together to really get the whole story. So inshallah, our attempt is to study his story, and inshallah we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to benefit from what we learn from that story. So this is the overview. We have 10 weeks. This is what I'm planning on covering. So week 1, which begins today, we'll be looking at the larger context. I've left them kind of vague because I don't want to play my hand and tell you where we're going completely. So I'll just give you some indications, and if you want to go and read about it, you can, but I'm not telling you the detail of what we're going to be looking at. So week 1, we're looking at context, the context of Musa's life and Banu Israel and whatnot. Week 2, we'll be looking at family, because Allah talks about Musa and his family. Week 3, we'll look at Musa's early life. Week 4, we'll look at in his life as a child. Week 4, we'll look at his young adulthood when he was a young man. Week 5, life changes, how his life was drastically changed at a certain point in time. Week 6, I've vaguely titled Control. Again, you'll have to wait to see what that means. Week 7, Oppression. Weeks 8 and 9, we're focusing on Banu Israel, the children of Israel, who are the people that Musa alayhi salam was sent to. And week 10, we'll be looking at the next generation, those who came after Musa alayhi salam, and some of their struggles and characteristics. So that's our course overview. I reserve the right to make changes at any moment in time without prior notification. All right? Right. So a couple of questions to begin with. What are similarities between Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam? Just off the top of your head, can you think of any similarities between the two of them? Yes. They both have excellent stories, right? Now you're going to find those stories in detail in 2 different places. Allah gives us a lot of Musa's story in the Quran. A lot of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's story is found in the Sunnah. But yes, they both have fantastic, amazing stories. Yes. Both were prophets and messengers. Excellent. Yes. They both brought laws, to their people. Yeah. They both had books, and I guess you could say the books are laws if we look at laws or the Sharia in a general context. If we mean laws as if what you do and don't do, yes. We also have other things like who Allah is, the hereafter, rewards and punishments. So yeah, definitely. Yes. They were both orphans. Interesting, Musa's father is not mentioned, and an orphan, Islamically defined, is anyone whose father dies before reaching the age of puberty. So I can't say definitively, but definitely his father is not mentioned. So we're left to guess, is he killed? Is he a slave somewhere? Is he working in Pharaoh's house and not able to get to his family? But very good point. Yes?
Tawheed, it was very strong on Tawheed in regards to idols and...
Okay, yeah, each of them took a very hard stance against idols, idolatry. Yeah. Yes? If we mean by Quran something read, yeah, they both knew their books pretty well, definitely. Yes? The establishing of their own nations. We'll look at that. That is an interesting point. That is an interesting point. Yes? Both were driven out of their lands. Excellent, yeah. Musa and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. That's all very good stuff. So we'll be looking at nations prior to Musa, different from the nation of Musa and those who came after. How were the nations prior to Musa different from the nation of Musa and those who came after? Yeah. What? Ibrahim alayhi salam was before. Yeah. Noah was before as well. He mentioned that they're different. The idea was different nations prior to Musa worship different gods. But there were prophets and messengers prior to Musa alayhi salam. Yes? They were enslaved. So you're saying the people that they were sent to were not enslaved. But were the nations after that enslaved as well? All the nations. When I say nations here, I'm talking about the people who received messengers. Okay, we'll look at that inshallah as we go through. All right, so when we talk about the story of Musa's life, there's some places that we can go. If you want to read about Musa's life in particular, details about his life, the best two surahs for that are Surah Taha, which is chapter number 20 of the Quran, and Surah Qasas, which is chapter number 28 of the Quran. If you want to see the interaction between Fir'aun and Banu Israel, then you want to go to Surah Al-A'raf, which is chapter number 7 of the Quran, and Surah Shu'ara, the poets, which is chapter number 26 of the Quran. If you want to see Banu Israel as a nation themselves, as a people, you want to look at them and their interactions, you would go to Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2 of the Quran, and Surah Al-Isra, which is also known as Surah Banu Israel. It's also known as Banu Israel Surah. Some of the scholars of Tafsir mention that is the name. The name of the surah is the children of Israel. So it has that surah number 17 has two different names. And if you want to read about the Jews, then you would read Surah Al-Baqarah, Ali Imran, An-Nisa, and Al-Ma'idah. In those four surahs in particular, you find a lot of talk about the Jews. What is the difference between the children of Israel and the Jews? That was a very interesting part of my research, because you find Allah uses both names. He uses Banu Israel, and then he uses El-Yahud. And so the question, I had never thought about that before. I mean, even pondered it. But what is the difference between Banu Israel and between the Jews? Historically, when we're talking about Banu Israel, we're talking about the sons of Ya'qub and their offspring, amongst who was Judah, which is translated as Yehuda. Okay? Now, after their exile, if I'm not mistaken, after the Babylonians conquered Israel, Judah remained. Each nation was supposedly given its own land. And so the children of Israel, in general, 10 of the tribes as described, had their own area of land. And Judah and Benjamin, their tribes, had their own land. And so Israel, as it was conquered first, and Judah remained. And so they have what they call the 10 lost tribes, where they don't really know what happened to them. They kind of dissipated they just kind of filtered into other nations. Well, who remained was the tribe of Judah. And so when you talk about the Yahud, you're talking about that tribe. Now, what makes them special is that they held on to, or they seem to have held on to, or revered the Torah. And so you'll find a lot of the references to the Yahud also references the Torah. Right? Because the Torah came with who? Musa. Was Musa before Yaqub or after Yaqub? After Yaqub. And Yaqub is Israel. And so the children of Israel existed prior to the existence of Musa and the Torah. So when you're talking about the Yahud, you're talking about a people who ascribe themselves to the Torah. And that's why you'll find in most references of the Yahud in the Quran, there's also a reference to the Yahud. So for example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَى عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى لَيْسَتِ الْيَهُودُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ. He says the Jews say the Christians don't stand on anything. And the Christians say the Jews don't stand on anything, and they both recite the same book. And so that reference to the book you'll often find with the Yahud. And so you're talking about a later people after the Jews had kind of been, or after the children of Israel had kind of been dispersed. Which again was, it's not just interesting, but it also lets you know that you're kind of dealing with a different people. And for Allah to use those different terms to refer to those people at different times. You know, in one instance, Banu Israel talking to the same people, reminding them of his favors. But then when you see him refer to the Yahud, oftentimes it's a people who don't want to listen, who are very nationalistic and want to hold on to what they have and don't want to accept Islam or the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So just some interesting stuff to keep one's eyes out for and to look out for. So when we compare the Prophet Musa alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what are some similarities that we see? Number one, each prophet came with some type of break in succession. So for example, you have a clear following. You have Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then you have Ishaq, and then you have Yaqub, and then you have Yusuf, and then there's a break, and then you get Musa that comes later. It's not that clean back to back to back. And similarly, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You have Ismail, and then you have the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why is that significant? Because when we talk about the concept of trying to establish prophethood, it's a question we get as Muslims. You know, how do you know he was a prophet? How do you know he wasn't a false prophet? And so on. And a lot of times we try to defend Islam and the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ with things we don't need to defend it with. Pose the question right back to them. How do you establish the prophethood of Musa alayhi salam? Whatever criteria you use for that, that's the criteria we use for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Why? Because number one, if you're dealing with a people who don't believe in prophets altogether, there's no need to even have that conversation. You understand? The person who doesn't believe in Allah We need to get to belief in Allah first before we talk about messengership. Number two, you're going to find a lot less resistance to Musa alayhi salam. You know what I mean? It's almost taken for granted that Musa was a prophet. It's not an argument that people have. And so again, whatever criteria, what is the criteria you use to establish that Musa was a prophet? If it is that he said he was a prophet, our prophet said he was a prophet. If you say, well, he came with a book, ours came with a book. You're hard pressed to get real tight criteria because usually it's an argument used to dismiss, not really trying to find truth. And so instead of trying to engage with different things that they're not going to accept anyway, make them bring the burden of proof. How do you establish a prophet? What critical means do you use to do that? And we'll look at that criteria and we'll say, Musa had miracles. Okay, we had miracles, but we don't believe in your miracle. You can't establish that the Red Sea was parted as much as I can establish that the moon was split. You can't you can't require extra proof of me that you don't require of your own selves. And so that's an idea. Recast that argument. Send it back to them. You don't have to come up with criteria. Make them come up with criteria. Because you believe in Musa. Are you going to ask them for proof that Musa was a prophet? No. So when they doubt the prophecy of our prophet, we put it back. We put it back in their corner. So so why did I mention that here? Because again, when they mention that there's a gap between Ismail and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so how can he be a prophet? There's a gap between Yaqub alayhi salam and Yusuf alayhi salam and between Musa. There's a gap. It's not as big, but how do you reconcile that? How do you deal with that? However you deal with that, in general, that's how we deal with it. You say, well, revelation. Allah said he was a prophet. Okay. Allah said Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a prophet too. But the idea is learning how to deal with those types of issues. Number two, their prophethood came suddenly and unexpectedly. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in a cave worshiping. And the angel Jibreel alayhi salam came to him suddenly. Musa was out looking he saw a fire. And he was looking for someone to guide him to where he was or to bring some fire back to warm his family. He was not going out looking to be a prophet. Again, people will knock, well, he just became a prophet like here in the mountain of Hira. Like Musa. What's the difference? That's not a knock on prophecy. And so you get those connections. And again, these things are also solace to the Prophet ﷺ. They're comfort to the Prophet. Why? Because this didn't just happen to you. This happened to Musa as well. And he was frightened when he threw down his staff. And it became a snake. Allah describes in the Great, turned around and kicked the rock. He was gone. You know? And Allah called him back. And so when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he ran home shaking, quivering, that's not a strange experience. And so again, through that reflective reading, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah protects his religion. And so all of those things that people try to use to, well, if it was from God, why was he scared? Why? Musa was scared. Musa was trembling. That doesn't interfere with the fact that he was a prophet. That doesn't break the fact that he was a prophet. He was married with a family at the time, as was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Musa was with his family, and he said, I'm going to go. He said, stay here. I'm going to go and bring some fire or find some information or bring some fire so that you could be warm. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam already had a family, had children as well. Fled his homeland to return later. So you mentioned that, Brother Abdul Malik, alhamdulillah, mentioned that Musa fled his homeland. He fled Egypt and returned. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam similarly fled Mecca and similarly returned. And when Allah talks to the Prophet ﷺ about that return for Musa, some of the scholars of tafsir indicate that that was kind of a hint to, just like he was kicked out and returned, you're going to return too. So it was kind of like a glad tidings that you're going to return to your homeland victorious as well, just as Musa alayhi salam did. Both were given a book. Both were spoken to by Allah Ta'ala. And when Musa, and I find this so significant, when Musa and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they met, when they spoke for the first time at Al-Isra, in the Ascension, what did they talk about? They talked about Salat. They talked about Salat. That was their conversation. Yani the concern that Musa had for a nation that didn't even belong to him. And he had fulfilled his obligation with his people. But when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had finished speaking with Allah and taken his directive, Musa asked him, what did your Lord tell you? He said he legislated 50 prayers. He said, go back, because they're not going to be able to fulfill it. And he was concerned about the Muslims maintaining Salat. Allahu Akbar. I mean, and Musa understood. Allah mentions in Surah Taha, وَأَقِمَ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِي. You know, establish prayer for my remembrance. When he asks for Harun to be his partner, why? كَيْ نُسَبِّحَكَ كَثِيرًا وَنَذْكُرَكَ كَثِيرًا. So that we can praise you much and we can remember you much. And so we think about that their conversation was one about prayer. That's what he talked about. And Musa was concerned that the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be able to uphold prayer. And so Allah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he spoke to Allah directly on the occasion of prayer. And he spoke to Musa alayhi salam on the occasion of the establishment of prayer. If that does not show the importance of prayer in the life of a Muslim, I don't know what does. I mean, these are just interesting things to reflect on. And again, it's important for us to take that prayer seriously, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established times for us to discourse with him, for us to ask him, to conversate with him, to ask him. He's established times throughout the day for us to ask him for guidance. It's significant, and we have to learn to appreciate that. No. Right. The brother mentioned that also shows the humility of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is, as you on the occasion, it is a humility that we as youth need to have, because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking to someone who did not have as much knowledge as he had. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is more knowledgeable about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It means the sisters theirs has gone out. So just give me one moment. Yes. So what that means is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was more knowledgeable about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than Musa was alayhi salam. If Musa were living, he would have no recourse, no option but to do what? To follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nevertheless, when dealing with someone who had less knowledge but had more experience, he did what? He listened. And so for the youth, who Allah may have blessed to travel overseas and to be able to study and learn things that maybe those who are older than them had never had the chance to learn, that doesn't mean that they're dismissed. Doesn't mean that their advice is not taken in consideration, because they've been practicing Islam in America longer than we have. And we've been overseas in a whole different context. They've been living Islam day to day. And so when they have advice to give, we listen. Now, there might come a point where we say, we appreciate the advice, but we have to do it this way. And that's what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did. When he got to 5 and Musa said, go back, he said, I can't go back anymore. That's enough. I'm too shy to go back. But the idea is that he took the advice. He listened. He at least heard him out and respected the fact that he has experience. And so when we talk about following the example of the Prophet ﷺ, it's not just an example of knowledge. It's an example of worship, and it's an example of interaction with other human beings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us better. Amen. Also, when we talk about the concept of their religion, the fact that the religion of, or what was established in the Torah, was not meant to be permanent. It was meant to be temporary. It was meant for a certain people. And what I find amazing, and this is a part of the history and the research, you'll find that Palestine, or Israel, or whatever we want to call that strip of land, it and Arabian Peninsula are very, very close. They're right next to each other. SubhanAllah, as it relates to the land of Palestine, it was constantly conquered, changed hands over and over and over again, where the message got mixed, the scholars were lost, and it could not be preserved because it was constantly being polluted and bombarded. The Arabian Peninsula, which is right beneath it, no one went. People went to Yemen, people went to Sham, to the Levant, and Palestine, that area. But no one went to the Arabian Peninsula. There was nothing really there. It was just hot, you know? But in so doing, because it was that way, the religion was preserved. It was not corrupted. It was not polluted. So even when we talk about the concept of geographic location, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where he placed these two revelations, one was intended to last and be preserved because it was in an environment where it could be. Whereas another one was meant to be temporary because it was in a place that was constantly dealing with turmoil. There was no stability. But for the Muslims of Arabia, the fighting was amongst Arab tribes. It wasn't Babylonians and Romans and all types, Assyrians and all types of other outsiders. Which again is just a point to reflect on. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the way that he created things, it's almost as if, and I only say that because I don't want to speak about what Allah chose to do or planned to do without knowledge. But the idea that it just seems that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepared things for Islam to be preserved and lasting. And as it relates to the Torah, he didn't prepare it to be lasting because it was just in a place of turmoil and constant change. And Allah knows best. There are certain things that set the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam apart from Musa alayhi salam. Number one, he never asked for help in conveying his message. When Musa alayhi salam when he was made a messenger, what did he ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for? For Harun, to be a support for him. Now, it's not a conclusion, but it's just an idea. One of the ways that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was better than Musa alayhi salam is that Allah spoke to both of them. But for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he took as a khalil. That's something that Musa didn't get. He didn't take him as a close friend. Ibrahim alayhi salam was also taken as a khalil. I wonder if that concept of being alone and only depending on Allah. Not saying that we don't accept help when it comes, but asking for someone else to be a part of that mission if that had something to do with that, with not being taken as a Khalil. I mean, it's just an interesting concept. But when the Prophet ﷺ was given his message, he didn't ask for someone to support him. He dealt with the task on his own, whereas Musa asked for support. Again, not something conclusive, but just something to think about. Again, he was taken as a close friend, as a Khalil, and again, his religion was lasting. Again, the environment may well have had something to do with that. Look at the key personalities. Alhamdulillah, we have about 20 minutes. Hopefully we can get through this. This is the big stuff. All right. So we have to build ourselves up to how we getting to Banu Israel and Musa alayhi salam. So we start off with Adam alayhi salam. Now, Adam is in Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah and in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter number 7 and chapter number 2 of the Quran respectively. Adam's story is a precursor, or it comes before Banu Israel. And Allah mentions the story of Adam, and then he mentions Banu Israel. What's the significance of that? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put Adam on this earth to be a Khalifa, to uphold the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gave him a covenant. Banu Israel was really the first nation of people to take on that covenant, and they didn't uphold it. And so it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he reminds us through the story of Adam of the covenant that we have with him. And then he gives us a story of a people who did not uphold that covenant, so that we would know what we need to do and the things we need to stay away from. How did another nation who came before you fail? This is what they did. If you want to keep my covenant, stay away from these characteristics. And so that influences how we read the Quran. Every time you see a reference to Bani Israel, we have to look at ourselves as Muslims and to begin to reflect. When we see those negative characteristics, that obstinance, that constant questioning, that trying to make something haram halal through certain means, it's important that we take a step back and look at things. We can hold it till the end, inshallah.
No, the sister's slide hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed? Thank you for letting me know. So it's important. Allah tells us about Adam alayhi salam, and we get to know what? We get to know how individuals fall. And you look at the story of Adam alayhi salam, and what happened? Allah put Adam where? Where was Adam? In Jannah. And how did Shaitan get him out? He made him ungrateful. How did he make him ungrateful? Why? Why take from the tree? You can be like an angel. Why do you need to be like an angel? Why do you need to have more than what Allah gave you? Isn't paradise sufficient? You won't be hungry, you won't be thirsty, you won't be naked, you won't be tired. Why don't you be an angel? And you look away from the ni'mah that Allah has given you, and you want something different. I don't want the comfort that Allah has given me. I want to be an angel. And so in getting him to look outside of what Allah had blessed him with, and not to realize the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him, then what happened? He lost all of it. And so that's a reminder to us. Allah gave Adam that initial interaction so that we as human beings would know the way that the shaitan tries to come. How does the shaitan try to come? By making us ungrateful. He says in Surah Al-A'raf, when he talks about the story of Adam, I'm going to come to them from the front and the back and the left and the right, and what? And you won't find most of them to be grateful and appreciative. No. And so it begins with Adam. And so Adam had his test. So we learned that as human beings, that we need to be grateful. And that ingratitude is a part of the makeup of human beings. And so we have to fight that nature. But in Banu Israel, we see how a nation of people go astray when they don't command what's good, and they don't forbid what's wrong, and they don't together try to uphold what Allah tells them to do. And they begin to work together in opposition to Allah's commands. It's a problem. We also see in that two sons. Adam had two sons. One was righteous and one was unrighteous. He murdered his brother. And so again, we're reminded of the fact that it's not your family relationships. It's not your nationality. It's not where you come from. It's not what you look like that is going to guarantee you salvation. It is piety. Both of these sons came from the same father. One was upright and one went astray. And so we learned that lesson from Adam alayhi salam. And that's a lesson for Banu Israel. And you don't think that it's just because you come from a succession of prophets, that you come from Yaqub alayhi salam, that you're going to attain salvation because of who your father is. Nah. Salvation is attained through obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and appreciation. And so the story begins with Adam. And again, you'll find that in the Quran, Allah mentions the story of Adam and Adam's fall and his recovery from that fall. Because that's where other religions stop. They just talk about the fall. Adam got back up. Allah gave him the opportunity to repent and he took it. So he mentions what happened with Adam, and then after that, especially in Surah Al-Baqarah, in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter number 7, he mentions Banu Israel to remind the Muslims of how we fall out of grace and out of salvation. Then we have Nuh alayhi salam. And Nuh was the beginning of the message. The beginning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conveying a message to disbelieving people. Because prior to Nuh, many of the scholars of Tafsir mentioned that everyone was a Muslim, yani practicing Islam. And Allah calls out Banu Israel in chapter number 17, which we said is also called chapter Banu Israel, known as Surah Isra. He says, ذُرِّيَّةَ مَنْ حَمَلْنَا مَعَ نُوحٍ, children of those whom we saved with Nuh. And then what does he say about Nuh? إِنَّهُ كَانَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. He was an appreciative, grateful slave. Again, revisiting that concept of gratitude and appreciation. Don't think that what you have to praise Allah for, it doesn't begin with you coming out of Egypt. Allah saved you prior to that, when He allowed you to even exist by saving you with Nuh alayhi salam. And Nuh was appreciative of being saved. Why don't you be appreciative of being saved? And He calls them the offspring of those who were carried with Noah. What does offspring mean? Children. What do we know about Noah's children, alayhi salam? One was disobedient, and others of them believed. So again, a reminder, being the son of a prophet doesn't save you. Don't think that your lineage, and you don't just come from Yaqub. They can't hear? They can't see? Lord. Don't just think that your lineage, don't think that your lineage is going to save you. What's going to save you, again, is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Inshallah, that's him. Then after Nuh alayhi salam, we have Ibrahim. With Ibrahim, he is the father of all of what they call the Abrahamic faiths, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Jews themselves like to claim Ibrahim as their own, which is very problematic. Allah tells them in Surah Ali Imran, chapter number 3 of the Quran, he wasn't a Jew or wasn't a Christian. And when you say Banu Israel, what does that mean? Children of Israel. Who is Israel? Yaqub. How can Ibrahim be from the children of Israel and he was their father? But that's how they like to set things up for themselves. And he wasn't a Jew. Because as we've mentioned, the whole concept of Jew, Yahud, comes well after. But they like to ascribe themselves again to him in order to boast their own lineage and the idea that Allah gave them a special covenant and that they are his chosen people or whatnot. And again, the reminder comes over and over again. Inna awla nasi bi Ibrahim lalladhina taba'uhu wa hadha an-nabi walladhina amanu. Those that have the most right to Ibrahim are those who follow him, not those from his family. Because if it was about family, then who would have been saved? His father. His father. His father has more right to him than his children do. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said what? You and your wealth belong to your father. Yeah? You and your wealth belong to your father. So if anyone has right to claim an individual, it's the father. But if his father could not be saved because of him, then his offspring similarly will not be saved by him. Then after Ibrahim alayhi salam, we have Ishaq. Again, another righteous individual who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran as being a gift to Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ishaq and Yaqub were both born in Ibrahim's lifetime. So he was able to not only see his son, but also his grandson, his grandson, which is Yaqub alayhi salam. And so Yaqub alayhi salam is the father of the tribes. And again, as we've mentioned, the Torah did not exist prior to the time of Musa alayhi salam. So during the time of Yaqub alayhi salam, although you have the children of Israel, you don't have the Torah in existence. Then you come to Yusuf, and this is where things get really interesting. Now, Yusuf alayhi salam is the one responsible for bringing or the entrance of Banu Israel into Egypt. Now, what seems to have happened is that the children of Israel became a part of the Egyptian society in totality. And why do I say this? I say this because the Jews, the present day Jews, they try to establish this concept of nationalistic purity, that they are this untainted people throughout the ages from Abraham or from Ibrahim all the way till now. And if you read the Quran, if they read their own books, it's very problematic. It's problematic, number one, because Yusuf alayhi salam, according to some reports, that they married the Egyptian people. It's difficult to think that they were in that society and no one married outside of the of the Jewish or the children of Israel. That's further confirmed by the actions of Musa alayhi salam. Because his wife was from where? Midian. He wasn't in Egypt, wasn't with his tribe when he got married. He was with the foreign people. And so if that was not allowed, and they had this whole concept of purity of nationality, then how did he marry outside of the culture? And then when you get to Dawood and Sulaiman, who had numerous wives, you just see that they're not really standing on anything. So really what you get the picture of, which is significant, is this people who have now acculturated into a foreign polytheistic society. The Egyptians were idolaters. And so now you have this people of religion mixing with these non-religious people. And you see the effects of that. Where do you see the effects of that? The fact that they were made slaves. Allah says in the Quran, Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change their own condition or the condition of themselves. We often misunderstand what that ayat means. What does that mean? We often take it to mean that if you want something out of life, if you want to change your bad circumstance, then you have to work to change it. In the Quran, Allah mentions that ayat again, but he recasts it. And he explains what he means. The Quran explains the Quran. He says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ نِعْمَةً أَنْعَمَهَا عَلَىٰ قَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That's because Allah does not change a blessing that he's given to a people until they change their own circumstances. So what that means is that you start off in good standing with Allah. When you begin to be disobedient, then Allah will take away your position of honor and allow you to be humiliated. That's what that ayat means. And so we see Banu Israel come into Egypt. Yusuf alayhi salam has high status. Yani he's not just a citizen. He's in the political scheme of things. He has power. And so when these people come in, they're not coming in lowly. They're coming in with respect. But what happens is they begin to mix in the culture. They begin to lose an appreciation for what they have. And they begin to practice idolatry like the Egyptians. And it seems like that's when they become slaves. It also appears that this concept of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was something that Yusuf establishes in Egypt. Allah mentions in Surah Ghafir, which is chapter number 40 of the Quran, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ يُوسُفُ مِنْ قَبْلُ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Yusuf came to you before with clear proofs. فَمَا زِلْتُمْ فِي شَكٍّ مِّن مَّا جَاءَكُمْ بِهِ. But you remained in doubt from what he came to you with. Where do we see, so if we say the Egyptian people were idolaters, where do we see that in Banu Israel? When they left Egypt, what did they do? They made an idol. Right. What does Fir'aun tell the Egyptians and the people there? I am your Lord the Most High. I don't know that you have a God other than me. The idea that I am the one true God. This one true God that you heard about, you talking about me. But the idea here is what? That the idea of one God was brought to the Egyptian people. That was something that they understood. For those who chose to worship idols, Pharaoh left them alone. For those who chose to worship Allah, those are the ones we punished. And that's why you'll find, right, Allah mentions in Surah Al-Ghafir, the same chapter, chapter number 40 of the Quran, same surah. What does he say? فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مُوسَى بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ قَالُوا اقْتُلُوا أَبْنَاءَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ. Kill the children of those who believe like him. When Musa came, kill those who believe like Musa. And this gives us another concept. They try to make it seem as if there was this separation. It was all of the children of Israel oppressed. And it was all of Egyptians who were in positions of authority. Absolutely, positively not. Number one, it mentions in the beginning of Surah Al-Qasas, chapter number 28 of the Quran, إِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ عَلَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. Fir'aun became haughty and proud in the land. He made the people sects, and he made them different groups. يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. He subjugated, he made slaves, a group of them. All of Banu Israel were not slaves. How do you know that? Allah says at the end of Surah Al-Qasas, إِنَّ قَارُونَ كَانَ مِنْ قَوْمِ مُوسَى فَبَغَى عَلَيْهِمْ. Qarun was from the people of Musa, but he oppressed them. And he had treasures, the keys of which would be difficult to carry. How did a person from Banu Israel, how did he have such keys and such wealth if all of Banu Israel was subjugated? Impossible. The fact that even the wife of Fir'aun, some of the scholars of history, they mention that she may have well been from Banu Israel, which is why there may have been an affinity towards her, with her towards the baby. The idea is that there wasn't a clear distinction between Egyptian and non-Egyptian. So when they give us this nationalistic, when they give us this nationalistic propaganda, this call to nationalism, that's what it was all about. Completely false. It was about belief, and it was about worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when those nationalistic distinctions became foggy, what happened? Those who did not believe messed it up for everyone else. When they came out of Egypt, it was all Banu Israel, the believers amongst them and the disbelievers. And when they came out, what did they do? They started making idols and those types of things again. So it wasn't this clear distinction between the Jews and the Banu Israel and the Egyptians. It's important to keep that in mind. To kind of conclude quickly, Musa alayhi salam also introduces, this is the difference between Musa and the nations that came before it. It was a new interaction. Prior to Musa, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deal with people? You believe, I send you a messenger, and I send you a sign. She, camel, whatever. If you disbelieve, what happens? Everybody gets wiped out. When Musa alayhi salam comes, it's different. It doesn't work that way. You're given respite to repent. That's how things work. And there's some allusions to that that can be found in Surah Al-Mu'minun, chapter number 23 of the Quran. He says, every time came to a nation its messenger, they denied him, so we made them follow one another to destruction, and we made them narrations. Yani, they became nations that were simply talked about because he destroyed them all. Then we sent Musa, and so that then shows a distinction. And you'll find when Allah mentions the other prophets and then he mentions Musa, there's usually going to be a division with then, showing that there's some type of change. Finally, the importance of this story. The story of Musa has a lot of importance for us. Number one, the religious implications. Allah mentions in Surah, you know when something is important, that it's a principle of the religion when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses it in Surah Al-Fatiha. Because you're repeating it all the time. And so when we say, غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ, those whom you were angry with, that we understand the concept, that we picture in our minds Allah being angry with us. And that be something that we be very afraid of. And that we see who he's talking about. And that he hasn't limited his mention of these people who he was angry with in the Quran. And so again, we are reminded of what they did to incur that anger. And that we try our best to stay away from those things. Number two, how we attain salvation. Salvation, again, does not come from who your family is. Doesn't come from your nationality. Doesn't come from your race. It comes from obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also how Allah's wrath is incurred. Why was Allah angry with these people? What did they do? And Allah allowed them to repent over and over and over and over again. And so we don't play with repentance. And it doesn't mean we stop repenting, but when we disobey Allah, we take it seriously. It's not a light matter. Social implications. That we'll be visiting some of the dangers of interacting with larger societies. Being in America, American Muslims, dealing with a larger non-Muslim society, what are the things that we have to be careful about? What are the things that we have to look out for? And how do we preserve our religious identity in this country? And that we make an effort to preserve our religious identity. That it's important that our children, that we practice Islam, that our children see us practice Islam, that we bring them and keep them around Muslims, because it's easy to go off and go astray until generations pass and all you have that's Muslim is the name. When you look at the actions, you don't see anything Islamic in the actions. His name is just Abdullah. His name is Mu'min. Ain't nothing about Imam can be seen in his character. We don't want to get there. And so we learn lessons about that in his story. And also, what's also beautiful is there are lessons for the Muslim household. When you see what a Muslim mother is like, her relationship with Allah, her own fears and discomforts, and discomforts, and you see brothers and sisters and how they interact. The fact that his sister, we don't never know her name, but we know his sister followed him and looked out for him and saw what happened to him. And that he looked out for his brother. He wanted his brother to be a prophet just like him. And what are the characteristics of a Muslim household? How are we supposed to interact with one another? How do we make our households vibrant, lively with Islam? These are all different things that we learn, and we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless us to have the time to cover in these coming 9 weeks. So that's in short, that's an overview of what we'll be looking at. I'm very excited about it. I hope you are. Please, I know I didn't give you too many hints, but do feel free. Look at that story of Musa and reflect on it and see what takeaways you can have or that you get, and bring them with you to class, and they're open for discussion, inshallah, if we have time. And Allah knows best. Subhanaka wa bihamdik. I apologize sincerely to the sisters for the problems that we had with the PowerPoint. Didn't have any control over that. We'll try to make sure that it's better for the upcoming lesson.